Good morning. I welcome you to the press conference in connection with the concluded meeting of European leaders on Ukraine. Mr. Prime Minister, please. You will admit that it is warmer here than it was at the airport in Poland, so we will probably have a little more time to talk. The meeting that many observers considered historic has ended. You saw it on the streets of London. Everyone here is very much affected by this difficult moment, a great challenge for the whole of Europe, not only for the European Union and Ukraine. And at the same time, you could see hope on the faces of people, observers, but also participants in this meeting. It was historic because the situation is historic. You know, war. And we all assume a breakthrough moment in this war and the approaching peace talks, even if we encounter a real obstacle course along the way. Also, the composition of this meeting heralds such a format that is really strong, I would say, because in addition to the European Union countries, as you know, this meeting was also attended by leaders from Norway, Canada, Great Britain, Turkey, and of course the European institutions and the NATO Secretary General. As I have already announced, there were no surprises. The Polish position accurately reflected the mood in the room, and on these most important issues, everyone more or less has a similar position. Ukraine requires constant support and a possibly strong position before negotiations with Russia. No one has any doubts about who is the aggressor, who is the victim, and on whose side Europe stands in this conflict. On the Ukrainian side, of course, everyone is also convinced that Europe must take on more and more responsibility and start bearing the burdens associated with building a defense industry, increased aid for Ukraine during the war, greater spending within NATO on its defense budgets. So there was no one here who questioned that either. And finally, there have also been some clearer declarations regarding the readiness to increase national spending in terms of percentage of GDP. Poland is an unattainable model here, but I am glad that more and more countries, in addition to words and declarations, are beginning to implement this obvious postulate of increasing defense spending. A very important voice for me was the one that appeared at the beginning of the discussion, also unquestioned by anyone, that the absolute priority for all of Europe, including the European Union, is to strengthen the eastern flank. And this is reinforcement consisting of financial and infrastructural support. By the eastern flank, we mean the countries that border Russia and Belarus, and therefore Poland in particular. As you know, the beginnings were difficult. It also required quite hard work and serious efforts on my part. But today, everyone without exception believes that this is a priority for the whole of Europe. No one also had any doubts. I want to emphasize this very strongly, that the absolutely most important thing for us, for Polish security, for European security, for the future of Ukraine, is to maintain the closest possible ties with the United States. I know that a narrative is emerging now, especially after this very strange Friday, after these events in the White House, which would actually, I think, divide Europe and the United States, and we cannot allow that. There are emotions. There are sometimes different points of view. Of course, we observe in such an extremely focused and vigilant way how the actions of the American administration look like. It is known how much depends on the position of the United States, but fortunately everyone, without exception, would like, regardless of emotions, for transatlantic, European-American relations to be as strong as possible. I have emphasized very strongly that Poland is, for obvious reasons, historically, emotionally, in connection with geography and a sense of such national interest, most interested in Europe becoming increasingly stronger and capable of defensive actions on a scale that is not necessarily greater than at the moment, so as to deter Russia from a possible attack, and that at the same time, not instead of, but simultaneously, Poland is working to maintain the strongest possible ties with the United States. That is why I unequivocally supported Prime Minister George Maloney's proposal for Europe and the United States to find such a way, such a place for continuous and very honest discussion and exchange of views, so as to understand each other as best as possible before these decisive events that lie ahead of us. And so I am talking here about negotiations and talks between Ukraine and Russia. And here we need to do everything so that Europe and the United States speak with one voice. So I am not minimizing. I am too experienced over the years to present such a hooray optimism that everything is fine and that everything is simple, what lies ahead. But one thing I can really confirm today, 100%, namely such a strong common opinion on all key issues concerning Ukraine and our European, or more broadly, Western, policy towards Ukraine and Russia. As you know, in a few days, we have a special meeting of the European Council on March 6th, where we will already assess specific proposals prepared by the European Commission. There was no talk of this here, because it was not a meeting of the European Union. But I know that these preparations are already in their final phase, and we will certainly make decisions that will significantly increase this feeling of not only solidarity, but also the strength of all of us and Ukraine before the negotiations. We also look at this 6th of March with such, cautious, but hope that there will be a very clear impulse, indicating also to Putin and Russia that no one from the West intends to capitulate to his blackmail and aggression. That's more or less it. Regardless of what you ask, I will not provide details, because everyone has been saying that we will try to treat these types of formats as discreet, for obvious reasons. So I hope you will be understanding. Okay, so let's move on to the questions. First editorial team, please. Good morning, Claudia Ramowicz. TVP Info. Mr. Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of Great Britain spoke this morning about the fact that Great Britain, France, and Ukraine are working on a ceasefire plan, which they are then to present to Donald Trump, that France and Great Britain are to be the leader, are to be at the head of the coalition of the willing, in quotation marks. I wanted to ask, what will be Poland's role here? We are looking for a way that would allow us to maintain unity not only within the European Union, here we have institutions, our representatives, but since we want to cooperate so closely, and this has already become a fact, and this has also been our postulate from the beginning also with our friends, from Great Britain, Norway, also from Canada, this readiness for very close cooperation declared today by Turkey is also something that is of great importance, considering the potential of these countries, and for this such cooperation is also needed for those who would prepare these talks and together with Ukraine could propose a certain European in quotation marks, because Turkey is Europe in a sense, but it is known that this is not a strictly European format, let alone Canada. In connection with this, what is needed is not such leadership, because that would perhaps be too strong a statement, but the involvement of leaders from countries and from outside the Union, and above all, the preparation of a possibly specific plan for negotiations. We all have the impression that, in general, at the moment, no one has such a plan, has not presented it, and that there is a bit of an impression of chaos, provisionality, spontaneity of action, and this sometimes also arouses such emotions, such as this nevertheless damaging spectacle a few days ago in Washington. Everyone would like to avoid this, and in fact, probably the best way is to try to present a certain common project calmly, systematically. It is very important for us that this project, of course, takes into account the position of Ukraine, that it is as common as possible for these more than 30 countries, not only for the Union, as a plan that could count on our universal support. However, a separate issue is this discussion about future security guarantees for Ukraine. Today, this was not the subject of the debate, and I would warn our partners, I have done this before at several meetings, not to give any false illusions and guarantees if not everyone is sure that they are able to meet such a challenge, because it would be a great challenge. So today, no one focused on declarations of who is ready to send what, organize what. The most emotional questions are always whether there will be soldiers on Ukrainian soil from other countries. This was not the subject of debate today. Nothing is changing for us. Poland will support these processes, but I apologize for the perhaps too simple wording. But we do not intend to push ourselves onto the front line. And everyone, as I have said many times, understands this. Both the President of Ukraine and our partners. Poland bears such heavy burdens. We, as a nation, as a state, have really done more than enough to help Ukraine since the first days of the war. We take seriously the need for armament and spending on the defense industry. And Poland also bears responsibility for protecting the eastern border, the entire NATO and the entire European Union. And I will engage Poland in a conversation about how to strengthen our border, first and foremost. This is also a form of helping Ukraine. In fact, Putin, if he sees that the eastern border of the European Union, and therefore the Polish border, is really very strongly protected and has become a priority, that there is much more equipment and people here, then his position will generally be weaker in the context of Ukraine as well. So that's what I'm going to focus on. Thank you very much. Next question, please. Nadolchak, Arnold Polsat News. Mr. Prime Minister, I know that the Prime Minister cannot reveal what decisions have been made, but I would like a declaration whether, apart from declarations, specific decisions have been made, yes or no, and possibly to clarify whether Europe currently has an idea on how to give some pace to events in order to even lead to peace talks, or possibly a ceasefire. Thank you. It was known in advance, and this was also the request of the host of today's meeting, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, not to create the illusion that this is some format that has a mandate to make decisions. Why is this important? I will close speculation on this topic, but as you have noticed, only some of the European Union countries were at this meeting. It would be very difficult, it is simply unthinkable, for some of the EU countries, Turkey, Norway, and Canada, to make decisions on behalf of all those who are not present at this meeting. The problem is that there are a lot of these countries, and there are also a lot of meetings. I understand the impatience, because it is absolutely understandable why so many meetings in such a format. Here the European Council, here 7 in Paris, here 18 in London, here 11 on video conference. I myself am not a fan of endless meetings, where at the end there are no formal, hard decisions. But because we all know how difficult the matter is, and how gut-wrenching this issue of war and peace in Ukraine is for all of us. So it was good that the process began, which was initially quite spontaneous and chaotic. But meetings in many different formats, because the most important thing today is that we quickly find a common language and a common position in the widest possible group of countries. In my opinion, this will also be important for President Trump, if he sees that such a large group of countries has a common position on Ukraine. Because in my opinion, this will also enable more effective negotiation on the part of President Zelensky on the terms of a ceasefire or peace conditions. So for an outside observer, it doesn't look particularly impressive. But as I participate in it, I observe it from the inside. For many, many years, what has been happening in the European Union and in the immediate neighborhood, a great deal of work has been done to bring this position closer concerning our involvement in Ukraine's war with Russia. And in the final effect, we have solidarity between European countries as strong as never before. Really. And the fact that everyone is ready to continue to help. We are talking about multi-billion expenditures. If the European Union decides, and it will decide, on further tranches of aid, countries have spoken about how much they have decided to organize in recent days financial and material resources for Ukraine. This has now become a truly united front. This is very important to us. Poland's historical curse has been loneliness very often. That is, geography plus loneliness. Today I can say that thanks to the efforts and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers, geography is a little less of a curse. Thanks to the fact that Ukraine has today taken on the burden of resistance to Russian aggression. And there is no talk of loneliness at all. I mean, they listen to us. They know what an important role Poland plays for various reasons. They recognize our, I would say, geopolitical wisdom when it comes to this region. That Poland was usually right in its assessment of what was happening to the east of the European Union. So the fact that everyone is speaking with one voice, and it really is a voice that Poland has shaped, is something that, and it's not about pride, satisfaction, but I'm proud in the sense that we managed to achieve something that seemed, difficult to achieve half a year ago, and 5 years ago, a complete mirage. And today, it's becoming a fact. And I want to emphasize this once again, because it is very important. I won't hide the fact that many of today's interlocutors emphasized how much of an impression this conflict meeting in Washington had on them. Some did not hide their depression, but at the same time, everyone spoke with one voice in our interest, and in the Polish interest in particular, it is to maintain the highest possible level of cooperation with the American ally. And this point of view of ours is also starting to get through to everyone's minds. The best way, we know, to discourage Putin and other aggressors is to build our own strength, and the best way to convince President Trump to want to strengthen cooperation with Europe and not weaken it is our European strength. Everyone will want to work with a strong partner. In times of war crisis, in times of threats, people, states, and nations are not so eager to cuddle up to the weak. I don't have to explain it. So I'm convinced that the best way to convince Washington that it's really worth investing in NATO and in European-American friendship is for Europe to be ready to act on a much larger scale in terms of its own defense capabilities. And President Trump has spoken about this directly many times. Be more independent. Get involved much more in your own defense. That's when you'll be a much more valuable partner. Thank you very much. And the last question. Good morning. Michał Fiducia from Polish Radio. You mentioned, Mr. Prime Minister, this series of meetings preceding today's event. We also have another European Council on 6th March. I would like to ask, because you mentioned this change of perspective on several key issues, does it, as you talk to European leaders, also concern the issue of the possible confiscation of Russian assets located in the West? Because, of course, we are talking more and more often about activating these interests. But what about capital? Do these talks look a bit different here, compared to, for example, recent weeks? There is no unity of views on this issue. Or let me put it differently. Everyone knows that it would be good if Russian assets were not frozen, but taken over and used for the defense and reconstruction of Ukraine. But some people are very afraid of some negative consequences. Is it for the euro, for the banking system? So there is not enthusiasm for this solution everywhere. Poland is very insistent on it, but let's not kid ourselves, because we are not in the Eurozone. So in this discussion, the Polish voice will not be the decisive voice. I know that. But the awareness that we have very little time, frozen assets are part of the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia. The freezing of assets is part of the sanctions. They must be extended again in June. If they are to be at least further frozen, then it is not only the interest on this account that serves Ukraine and the common defense, this interest also constitutes such debt security, for example when it comes to loans in the G7. So these frozen assets do work, and on several levels, I would say, for the benefit of Ukraine. However, the most important thing for us at the moment is to maintain this, at least that is, to extend the sanctions in June. Obviously, this requires unanimity. We know what Hungary's position is. So far, in the last few months, Prime Minister Orban has been saying that he will not extend it, and towards the very end, he somehow gave in to pressure and agreed to extend the sanctions. As it will be in June, I suspect that Budapest's position will depend to a large extent on suggestions from Washington, I think. And for now, let's focus on working together to maintain these sanctions, because they work. Those who say that sanctions have not had an effect really have no idea what they are talking about. And the fact that Ukraine has been able to defend itself for 3 years is not only the result of their heroism, it is not only the result of this great help from the United States and Europe, but it is also the effect of the sanctions of weakness, as such already visible to the naked eye of the financial and economic weakness of Russia, which is the effect of, among other things, sanctions. So for me, the most important thing is that since the probability that Russian assets will be seized still does not seem too high, let's at least focus on extending the sanctions in June. Especially since I don't think the peace talks will be finished in June, so it would be good for Russia to still feel this pressure and the power of this argument when the peace talks are finalized, if they happen at all. But yes, you hit the nail on the head, looking for a topic where there was no common determination. The opinion is supposedly common, but the common determination is still missing.